Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now. Whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment, I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Hi and welcome. I'm Midnight Truth, and it's so nice to have you here tonight, wherever you are right now, whether you're in bed, lying on the couch, or just looking for a quiet moment. I want you to know this time is for you. Take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, feel the weight of the day start to fade. Let your mind settle, let your body relax, and let yourself simply be. There's no rush, no pressure, just this calm, quiet moment. If you'd like, you can close your eyes and imagine yourself in a peaceful place. Maybe it's a cozy room with soft, warm lighting. Or maybe it's under a starry sky, with a gentle breeze brushing against you. Wherever you feel safe and calm, let yourself drift there. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time is it there? Tonight's story is gentle and soothing, perfect to carry you into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. I remember the day I moved into the house like it was yesterday. It was one of those rainy mornings where the sky hangs low, and everything feels too quiet, as if the world is holding its breath. I had just divorced my wife of 8 years, and the thought of living in a new place, away from everything familiar, seemed like the right kind of fresh start, a chance to heal, to find myself again. The house was old, ancient really, on the outskirts of town, nestled among tall, barren trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky like skeletal fingers. It wasn't much, just a 2-story Victorian that had seen better days. But it had character. I'd seen the listing online, and there was something about it, something that called to me. The rent was cheap, and I figured with my new job and fresh start, it was the perfect place to settle in. The moment I stepped inside, I knew the house had a life of its own. The floors creaked under my weight, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood, damp carpets, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. The walls seemed to whisper when the wind picked up, and the windows rattled like they were trying to hold on to something just outside of sight. I didn't think much of it at first. It was an old house. Houses like this had quirks, right? I told myself it was nothing more than the house settling. And maybe it was. But then, on my first night, the sound started. At first, it was nothing more than the occasional creak of floorboards, faint footsteps above me as I lay in bed. The place was drafty, after all, and old houses are bound to make noise. I shrugged it off and turned over, pulling the covers higher as the rain pattered against the windows. The next morning, as I was unloading the last of the boxes into the living room, I met Mrs. Caldwell, my neighbor. She was an older woman with graying hair and a hawk-like gaze that seemed to pierce through you. I hadn't expected to meet anyone so soon, but she was standing on her porch, watching me as I worked. "Moving in, huh?" she called out, her voice raspy from years of smoking. "Yeah," I said, wiping my brow. "Just got here yesterday." She nodded slowly, eyeing the house behind me. "You're the latest, I see." I raised an eyebrow, unsure what she meant. "Latest? The house," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a secret. Been a lot of people come and go from there, but they don't last long. I frowned. What do you mean? Mrs. Caldwell looked over her shoulder, as though making sure no one else could hear. It's got a history. Strange things have happened. People hear things, see things. Last family left in a hurry. Said they were hearing footsteps at night. Saw things moving in the shadows. Something about that house. Well, it's got a way of driving people out. I laughed nervously. I'm sure it's just the house settling, you know. Old houses do that. Creak and groan. She didn't smile. You'll see. Don't say I didn't warn you. The conversation ended there, and I didn't think much of it at the time. I chalked it up to small-town superstition and dismissed it as idle gossip. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I figured I'd just need some time to adjust. That's all. But the sounds, those faint footsteps, didn't stop. They were subtle at first, like someone walking in the room above mine, or the creak of floorboards shifting in the hall. I told myself it was just the house settling, like I had on the first night. But when the whispers started, faint, low voices at the edge of my hearing, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, as I lay in bed, listening to the rain batter against the windows, I heard something distinctly different. The unmistakable sound of a door opening upstairs, followed by the soft, measured steps of someone or something moving across the floor. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It wasn't the house settling. I knew that now. Something was in the house with me. But what? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I wasn't alone anymore. And whatever it was, I could feel its presence, even if I couldn't see it. I didn't sleep much the next few nights. The footsteps kept coming, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing the hallways above me, just out of reach. At first, I tried to ignore them, convincing myself that it was just the house's old pipes or the wind rattling through the cracks in the walls. But after a while, it became impossible to dismiss. It was always at night, when the house was still, and the world outside was blanketed in darkness. I'd lie there in the quiet, waiting for it to begin. The first creak of the floorboards, the soft shuffle of steps on carpet, the sound of something heavy dragging across the floor above me. Sometimes, I'd hear a door creak open, followed by a faint tapping or scratching sound, like someone running their fingers along the walls. I'd get up, walk to the stairs, and listen. Nothing, only silence. My heart would race. My breath would catch in my throat, but nothing was ever there. I told myself I was being paranoid. Old houses do that to you, don't they? They play tricks on your mind. The house creaks. The wind howls. Shadows grow longer and stretch in the corners, teasing you with their shapes. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a house. Something was there. On the fourth night, I decided I had enough. I needed to find the source of the noises once and for all. I grabbed a flashlight and moved through the house slowly, methodically, checking each room. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, and the beam of light danced across the walls, casting eerie, elongated shadows. I checked the attic, the basement, everywhere, but all I found was dust, cobwebs, and the heavy scent of old wood. As I was about to head back to my room, I heard it, a soft tapping on the door at the end of the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, staring down the darkened corridor, the tapping growing louder, more urgent. I didn't want to go any closer. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, but something pulled me toward it. I reached for the door, the cold metal of the doorknob biting into my palm as I turned it. The room was pitch black, the air stale and thick. But as I stepped inside, I felt a chill settle around me. The temperature dropped, the air becoming icy as I moved deeper into the room. The flashlight's beam trembled in my hand, as if unsure of what it would reveal. Then, I heard it again, a soft, dragging sound. It came from the far corner of the room. My breath hitched in my chest, and I took a step back. Nothing, only the silence of the room. I was about to leave when my light flickered briefly, but long enough for me to catch a glimpse of something. A shadow, standing motionless against the far wall. My blood ran cold as I stared at it, unsure if it was real. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. And then, just as quickly, it vanished. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me, my heart pounding in my ears. What was that? What had I just seen? I rushed back to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The house was too quiet now, too still. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you, forcing you to listen to every little creak, every faint whisper. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands trembling as I sipped my coffee. I needed answers. I couldn't keep pretending that this was normal. I needed to understand what was happening in this house. That's when Mrs. Caldwell's words came back to me. Strange things have happened. I had to find out more. I went to the local library, hoping to uncover something about the house's past. Maybe there was some historical record, an old newspaper clipping, or a story passed down through generations. Anything that could explain what was going on. I asked the librarian if she had any information about the house, and she gave me a strange look before nodding and leading me to the back of the library. She pulled a dusty old book from the shelves, its leather cover cracked and faded with age. "This is all we have," she said softly, as though she didn't want anyone else to hear. "It's about the old families in this town. Your house. Well, it's not exactly something people like to talk about." I opened the book, flipping through yellowed pages filled with handwritten notes and faded photographs. And then I found it, a paragraph about the original owner of the house, a man named Nathaniel Graves. Nathaniel Graves had been a recluse, a man obsessed with the occult. He spent years collecting books on ancient rituals, arcane knowledge, and strange rites. It was said that he had tried to summon something from beyond, something dark and malevolent. The rumors suggested that his experiments had gone horribly wrong, and that the house itself had become a conduit for whatever he had called. The last entry in the book was dated several decades ago. It described the last family who had lived there. They had fled in the middle of the night, leaving behind all their belongings. The father had been babbling incoherently about voices in the walls and eyes in the dark. My skin crawled as I closed the book, a chill creeping up my spine. What had I gotten myself into? Was it possible that the house was cursed? That whatever Nathaniel Graves had summoned all those years ago had never left? I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right in front of me. The strange noises, the cold spots, the feeling of being watched. I wasn't just hearing things. Something in this house was alive, something old and malevolent, and it was beginning to stir again. The days began to bleed together, each one indistinguishable from the last. I couldn't shake the unease that gnawed at me constantly, the feeling of eyes on the back of my neck, even when I was alone in my room. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, and every time I closed my eyes, I was haunted by dark, shifting shapes, cold whispers just out of reach. It was the nights that were the worst. At first, I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses creaked, especially at night when the wind picked up. But the sounds were different. They weren't the usual groans and pops of the old wood. They were deliberate, heavy footsteps, like someone walking through the hallways. Someone much heavier than me, someone who shouldn't have been there. The first night I heard it, I sat up in bed, wide awake, straining to listen. The footsteps came from upstairs, slow and methodical, as though someone was pacing back and forth. I waited for the sound to stop, but it didn't. It went on, each footfall louder than the last, until it seemed to come closer, closer to my door. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I held my breath, waiting. But then, as suddenly as it began, the footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing, just silence. I stood up, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet, and I made my way to the door. My hand hovered over the knob, my thoughts racing. Maybe it was just a house. I told myself. Old houses did strange things. But even as I tried to convince myself of that, something inside me knew better. I opened the door cautiously and peered into the darkness of the hallway. There was nothing. No sign of anyone, no hint of movement. Just a cold, empty silence. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something faint but putrid, like decay. I could feel a chill creeping up my spine, a sense that I wasn't alone. I walked down the hall, the silence pressing in on me. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon through the windows, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. As I passed the closed door to the attic, I felt an inexplicable urge to open it, but I didn't. I couldn't. The door seemed to stare back at me, silent and implacable. I kept moving, my breath shallow and quick, until I reached the stairs leading down to the lower floor. That was when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. It came from behind me, from the direction of the attic. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but as I stood there, straining to listen, it became clearer. The whisper was coming from the door to the attic, but it wasn't the wind. No! It was something far worse. It was a voice. Help me. The whisper was weak, desperate, barely audible, but it sent a wave of ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. I turned quickly, my eyes wide with panic, but the hallway was still empty, just the darkness stretching out before me. I didn't dare look at the attic door again. Instead, I ran down the stairs, my feet slipping on the worn wood as I hurried to the living room. I turned on every light in the room, hoping the harsh brightness would chase away the growing dread that clung to me. But even as the light filled the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls seemed to press in around me, the shadows flickering in the corners of my vision. I couldn't tell if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or something else, something far darker, waiting in the house. That night, I barely slept. The whispers continued, muffled and distant, like a forgotten chant coming from the walls. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of the figure in the hallway, a shadow, a vague silhouette that seemed to loom just out of view, just beyond my reach. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was just stress, the aftereffects of moving into a new place. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It couldn't be. There was something in this house, something ancient, something malevolent, and it was watching me. The next morning, I went outside for some fresh air, desperate for a break from the oppressive atmosphere inside. My neighbor, the one who had mentioned the house's past, was out in her garden. She waved when she saw me and came over to the fence. "I saw you moving in," she said, her voice friendly, but there was something off about her eyes. They darted nervously, as if she were afraid to say too much. "How's the house treating you?" I forced a smile, even though I could feel the tension building in my chest. It's fine. A little old, but I'll get used to it." She hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You should be careful in that house. People have gone missing in there. Some say it's cursed." I raised an eyebrow, not sure if she was joking or if she had lost her mind. "What do you mean? Missing?" Her face grew pale, and she glanced nervously over her shoulder. "A long time ago, there was a man, Nathaniel Graves. He was the original owner. People say he was obsessed with things he shouldn't have been. Occult stuff, rituals. He used to lock himself away for days at a time, speaking in strange languages. One day he just disappeared. No one knows where he went." I stared at her, unsure how to respond. It all sounded ridiculous, like something out of a ghost story. "The house has a way of making people disappear," she continued softly, her voice shaking. "They say the last tenants, well, they left in a hurry. I heard one of them ran out in the middle of the night, babbling about curses and things watching them. There's something in there, something you don't want to mess with. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Her words echoed in my mind as I walked back inside the house. The whispering had started again. This time, it wasn't just from the attic. It was coming from everywhere. The days that followed felt like I was walking on the edge of a precipice, teetering between the normal and the supernatural. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was alone. My reflection in the mirror seemed to linger a moment too long, and sometimes, when I would turn to glance behind me, there was just the faintest hint of movement in the shadows, too quick to be sure of. I'd tell myself it was just stress, the product of too many sleepless nights, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was here. I began to investigate the house more thoroughly, searching every nook and cranny, hoping to find some clue that could explain what was happening. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe an old diary, a letter, a symbol carved into the walls. But my curiosity pushed me forward. It was in the attic that I found the journal. I had been up there before, of course. The attic was cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and layers of dust. But this time, I was drawn to an old wooden trunk pushed against the far wall, half hidden behind a pile of yellowed newspapers. The lock had long since rusted away, and when I lifted the lid, it creaked open with an eerie groan. Inside, I found a stack of old papers, each one brittle with age. At first glance, it seemed like nothing more than a collection of mundane letters and notes, but then I saw it, a thick leather-bound book at the bottom, its cover worn and cracked, the edges frayed from years of handling. The journal. I hesitated for a moment before reaching for it. Something about it felt wrong, like I was holding something far older than the house itself. But I couldn't stop myself. I opened the cover, and the first page sent a chill through my bones. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the words were clear. Asterisk, I have opened the door. Asterisk, the entry was dated the year Nathaniel Graves had moved into the house. It seemed almost like a confession, a record of his experiments and his descent into madness. The more I read, the more my heart pounded in my chest. Graves had been attempting to commune with something beyond this world, something dark, something ancient. The journal spoke of rituals that required blood, sacrifice, and ancient symbols etched into the very fabric of the house. There were references to whispers in the dark, voices that called to him in his dreams. It became clear that Graves had opened something, a doorway, a portal, a tear between worlds, and whatever had come through was not willing to leave. The entries grew more frantic as time went on. Graves spoke of feeling watched, of hearing footsteps in the halls when no one was there, of feeling cold hands brush against the skin in the middle of the night. But the most chilling part of the journal was the final entry. Asterisk, it is here. It watches. It waits. Asterisk. The last page was covered in symbols. Symbols I recognized from some of the books I had seen in the library. The same symbols that Nathaniel Graves had drawn in his rituals. The same ones that were said to summon spirits from the other side. But there was something else, something more sinister. At the bottom of the page, in large, desperate letters, were the words, Asterisk, do not enter the room. Do not open the door. Asterisk. I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking. My mind raced. What door? What room? I needed answers. But even as I stood there, holding the journal, I felt the air in the attic grow colder, a sharp chill creeping up my spine. The temperature dropped so quickly, I could see my breath misting in the air. My pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. I looked around the attic, my eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. And that's when I saw it, a door I had never noticed before. It was tucked away in the farthest corner, barely visible behind a stack of old crates. The wood was rotting, the frame warped, and the door itself looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. There was no handle, only a rusted bolt locking it shut. I walked toward it, my footsteps slow and heavy. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached out and touched the cold surface of the door. The air around it felt thick, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. I stood there for a long time, just staring at it. Then I heard it, a soft tapping sound coming from the other side of the door. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the journal. The sound was unmistakable, like someone was knocking, gently but persistently. My breath caught in my throat as I looked back at the door. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. It was almost as if whatever was on the other side wanted to get out. I couldn't move. My feet felt frozen to the floor, my body paralyzed by fear. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but something held me there, something inexplicable, as if I were drawn to the door, compelled to open it. The tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by a low, guttural whisper that seeped through the cracks in the wood. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable, pleading, desperate, and full of anger. I took a step back, my heart racing. The room was still, the only sound the frantic pounding of my own heart. I ran down the stairs, leaving the attic behind, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. I didn't look back, but as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it again, the sound of footsteps, slowly, deliberately, like someone was walking behind me. I spun around, but the house was empty, the hallway stretching into the darkness. I had to get out. I had to leave this place before whatever Nathaniel Graves had summoned found me. But even as I packed my things and prepared to leave, the whispers followed me. They seemed to be everywhere now, whispering from the walls, from the floorboards, from the shadows. I wasn't alone in this house anymore, and no matter how far I ran, I knew the house would always be with me. The door was still waiting to be opened. The whispers persisted, growing louder each night, as though the house itself were trying to communicate with me. It wasn't just the footsteps anymore. It was voices, faint but unmistakable, soft murmurs, like hushed conversations just beyond the reach of understanding. And there were cold spots, too, pockets of air so frigid they made my skin crawl, freezing me in place whenever I walked through them. The sensation of being watched didn't fade either. It was constant, like the weight of invisible eyes following my every movement. No matter how many lights I turned on, no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, the feeling only grew stronger. I had tried to ignore it at first, but something inside me kept pushing me toward the attic. I don't know why. Maybe it was the stories my neighbor had told me, or the growing sense that there was something I was missing. But I knew deep down that the answers lay up there. One afternoon, after a restless night, filled with nothing but the constant whispering, I decided to confront it. I couldn't live like this anymore. Constantly afraid, constantly on edge. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the attic door, my heart pounding as I reached for the handle. The air felt heavier here, thicker, like something had been waiting for me. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of must and decay hit me in waves. I stepped into the attic, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. Dust hung in the air, thick enough to make it hard to breathe. The floor creaked under my weight as I carefully moved deeper into the room. Cobwebs stretched across the corners, their strands glistening in the dim light. At first, all I could see were old boxes, forgotten memories of people long gone. But then in the far corner of the attic, something caught my eye, a small wooden chest half hidden behind a stack of old blankets. My pulse quickened as I approached it, curiosity and dread mixing in a sickening combination. I knelt down in front of the chest and dusted it off. It was locked, the wood weathered with age, but something about it felt significant. A sense of urgency washed over me, like I had to open it, like whatever it contained was calling to me. I found an old key on the nearby shelf and, with trembling hands, I inserted it into the lock. The chest clicked open. Inside, there were papers, tattered, yellowed, and brittle with age. They looked like journals, Handwritten notes scrawled on pages that seemed to crumble with every touch. My fingers trembled as I flipped through them, the words slowly coming into focus. The writing was jagged and messy, as though the person had been frantic, desperate. It didn't take long for me to realize that this was Nathaniel Graves' journal, the original owner of the house. The first few pages were filled with mundane notes, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I read further, the tone began to shift. The words grew more erratic, more disturbing. Asterisk, the rituals must be completed. The door will open, and then we will be free. Asterisk, asterisk, I hear them at night. The whispers. They're calling me. I must answer. I must. Asterisk, asterisk, the house is alive. I can feel it breathing, its heartbeat in the walls. It wants something from me. It needs me. Asterisk, the further I read, the more unsettling it became. Nathaniel had been obsessed with the occult, with summoning spirits and opening doors to another realm. And as the pages went on, it became clear that he had succeeded. The door he had opened was still open, still feeding on the souls of those who dared to enter. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I read the last few entries. Asterisk, they are here. They want me. They want my soul. I have tried to close the door, but it will not shut. They will take me, and then they will take everyone. They will never stop. Asterisk, the last page was almost illegible, smeared with ink as though Nathaniel had written it in a frenzy. Asterisk, the curse will live on. I will be the first, but not the last. It will wait for the next person to take my place. To open the door again. Asterisk, I dropped the journal. The sound of the pages fluttering in the silence echoing in my ears. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. What had I just read? What had I uncovered? I didn't want to believe it, but I knew I had no choice. The house wasn't just old and creaky. It was cursed. And whatever Nathaniel had done, whatever ritual he had performed, had left something behind. Something dark. Something malevolent. I backed away from the chest, my breath coming in short gasps. The whispers started again, louder now, as if they were right behind me. I turned to leave the attic, but before I could reach the door, I froze. A shadow shifted across the far wall, a figure that wasn't mine. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my heart thudding in my chest, the cold air thick with the scent of decay. The figure was barely visible, just a silhouette in the dim light, but it was there, watching, waiting. My throat went dry, and I instinctively took a step back, but my foot hit something soft. I looked down and saw a pile of old blankets, now shifted and disturbed, as though something had been lying there. The figure moved. It stepped closer, and I could hear its breath, slow, deep, deliberate. And then I heard it whispering my name. Leave. The voice was faint but unmistakable. I didn't need any more convincing. I turned and ran, my feet pounding on the creaky floor as I bolted down the stairs, the whispers still following me, growing louder with each step. I didn't stop running until I was out of the house. My heart was racing, my chest tight with panic. I stood in the yard, gasping for breath, staring up at the house. The lights were still on, but something in the windows had changed. There was movement inside, shadows that danced in the dark. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run as far away as possible, but I couldn't. Something held me there. Something inside that house was waiting for me to return. The whispers hadn't stopped. They were still there, still calling to me. I didn't know how much longer I could stay in this place, but I also didn't know if I would ever truly leave. I hadn't meant to go back. I tried to shake the thoughts of the house, of the whispers, of that cold figure in the attic. But every day, the memories kept gnawing at me, pulling me back. The house had a grip on me, whether I liked it or not. It was a part of me now, and the more I tried to forget it, the more persistent the pull became. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head, just a series of coincidences, the echoes of an old, forgotten house. But deep down, I knew better. I had seen the shadow in the attic. I had heard the whispers calling my name. And that damn journal, Nathaniel Graves' journal, the more I read it, the more I understood. The curse wasn't just some old superstition. It was real. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't finished something. That there was something left undone. Something I needed to confront. I needed answers. I had to know what really happened in that house, what Nathaniel had done, and what I was really dealing with. The temptation grew stronger as the days passed. I began to notice the small things. The way the house seemed to breathe at night, the subtle creaking of the floorboards, the strange cold spots that followed me like a shadow. It was as though the house was aware of my presence, and it wanted me to return. I couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, when the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, I found myself standing at the doorstep once again. The house loomed before me, silent and still, but there was something about it, something that made the air heavy, suffocating, as if it were holding its breath, waiting. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. The memory of that night in the attic rushed back. The feeling of something watching me, the whispering voices, the cold presence in the shadows. But there was no turning back now. I had to know. I pushed the door open. The house smelled the same, musty, like forgotten memories, like something ancient and long buried. The creaking floors greeted me as I stepped inside, and for a moment, it felt as though the house was welcoming me back, almost as if it had been expecting me. I walked slowly through the living room, the flickering light from the fireplace casting long shadows on the walls. Every step seemed to echo, reverberating through the empty halls. The house felt so much larger than it had before, its dark corners swallowing the light. The whispers, faint but growing, were back. I made my way upstairs to the attic, my heart pounding with every step. The stairs creaked beneath me, the sound amplifying in the eerie silence. I could feel the temperature drop with every step, the cold air biting into my skin. When I reached the attic door, it was slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting for me. The flashlight was still there, next to the chest. I could hear the whispers now, louder, more insistent, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. My breath caught in my throat, and I hesitated, unsure if I was truly ready to face what lay beyond. I stepped inside. The attic was just as I had left it. The chest still in the corner, the cobwebs still hanging in the corners. But there was something else now, something that hadn't been there before. The air felt thick, charged with a presence that I couldn't explain. It was as though the house was alive, its walls pulsing with an energy that seemed to reach out, grasping at me. I moved toward the chest, my hands trembling as I reached for it. This time, the lock wasn't difficult to open. It gave way with a soft click, as though it had been waiting for me to return. Inside, the journal was still there, but there was something new. A piece of paper, folded and yellowed with age, lay atop the worn pages. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The message was scrawled in a hurried, frantic hand. The ink smeared as though the writer had been in a rush. Asterisk, they will not stop. They never will. They are waiting for you. You are the key. I am sorry, but there is no escape. Asterisk, I felt a cold chill sweep over me, and I glanced around the attic, half expecting to see a figure standing in the shadows. But there was nothing, just the darkness and the silence. But I could feel it. Something was there. I turned back to the journal, flipping through the pages once more. I had to know. I had to understand what Nathaniel had done. As I read, I learned more about the ritual, the one that had opened the door to the other side. Nathaniel had performed it in secret, using forbidden symbols and ancient incantations. He had summoned something dark and ancient, and in doing so, he had unlocked the door between this world and the next. The journal spoke of the horrors he had unleashed, the entities that had slipped through the door, the whispers that followed him, the shadow that had taken root in the house. It became clear to me that Nathaniel hadn't just been trying to summon spirits. He had been trying to harness something far darker, something that had latched onto the house, waiting to be freed. And now, it was waiting for me. I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. The whispers had turned into voices, low, guttural, unintelligible, but unmistakably there. They were coming from all around me, circling, closing in. I took a step back, my foot landing on something soft. I looked down, my blood running cold. It was a body that hadn't been there before. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. The body was twisted, contorted unnaturally, its eyes wide open, staring up at me with an expression of pure terror. It was as if it had been waiting for me to find it, waiting for me to see. Before I could move, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. And then I heard it, the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the far corner of the attic. I wasn't alone anymore. The shadows in the corner of the room shifted, and I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, with hollow eyes and a mouth twisted in a grotesque smile. It was waiting, and it was coming for me. My breath caught in my throat as the figure in the corner of the attic moved. Its shadow stretched long and unnatural, stretching far beyond the dim light of the flashlight. I could feel the cold, the oppressive weight of its presence, suffocating me as I took a step back, my legs trembling beneath me. I wanted to scream, to run, but the air in the room seemed to freeze, each breath more difficult to take, as though the house itself were holding me in place. The figure, it was tall, impossibly tall, and its eyes, black as coal, stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It didn't move, not at first. It just stood there, its head tilting slightly, as if it was studying me, sizing me up. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with each passing second. I reached for the flashlight, my hand shaking as I tried to steady the beam. The figure's face remained a blur, its features indistinct, like a shadow shifting in the corner of my vision. But I could feel it, the presence, the malevolent energy radiating from it. And then it moved. Faster than I could react, it lunged at me, a blur of darkness, its limbs twisting in unnatural angles. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, my legs refusing to cooperate. The flashlight dropped from my hand, rolling across the floor, casting erratic beams of light that only seemed to make the darkness deeper, more suffocating. I had to get out. I had to escape. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the wooden floor of the attic, the sounds of my hurried footsteps mingling with the soft scraping noise of the figure behind me. It was following me, relentless, its footsteps echoing in the silence like a drumbeat of doom. I ran blindly, crashing into boxes and old furniture, my mind screaming for me to find the door, the way out. The attic felt endless. No matter how far I ran, it was as if the space stretched before me, pulling me deeper into its suffocating embrace. The darkness seemed to close in tighter, the air heavier with each step. I reached the edge of the attic, my hands fumbling for the door. It was locked. I had to get out, had to escape. My fingers scrambled at the cold metal doorknob, but the door wouldn't budge. The pounding of my heart filled my ears, drowning out everything else. And then a cold hand wrapped around my ankle. The force of it yanked me back, sending me crashing to the ground. My hands scraped against the wooden floor, the pain a distant echo in my mind. I twisted, trying to free myself, but the grip tightened. The cold, so cold it burned, clung to me like ice, freezing my very bones. I reached for anything to help me. My hand closed around a rusted pipe, and with all my strength, I swung it behind me, hearing the sickening crack as it connected with something solid. The grip on my ankle loosened, and I scrambled away, gasping for breath, my eyes wide in terror. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to escape, to survive. I tore at the door, pulling at the handle with desperate hands. And finally, it gave way, swinging open with a screech that echoed through the empty house. I stumbled into the hallway, my body shaking, my heart racing so fast it felt as though it might burst. I couldn't hear the figure anymore, but I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. I ran. I didn't stop, even when my legs burned, even when my breath came in ragged gasps. I had to get out, had to leave this house, this cursed place behind. But the house had other plans. The moment I stepped into the stairwell, I felt it, cold, icy fingers brushing against my neck, a whisper so close I could almost hear it in my ear. Asterisk, you can't leave. Asterisk, the voice, guttural, unnatural, slithered through the air, wrapping around me like a vice. I stumbled, my foot slipping on the worn steps, but I caught myself just in time, pressing on, each step heavier than the last. I reached the front door, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the knob. My eyes were wide, darting back and forth, searching for any sign of movement. The door creaked, the sound like nails on a chalkboard, and finally, I was outside. The fresh air hit me like a slap to the face, but it didn't bring relief. The weight of the house still clung to me, like an invisible chain, tugging me back. I stumbled away from the doorstep, my heart still hammering in my chest. But the house, asterisk, it wasn't finished with me, star. The front door slammed shut behind me with a violent bang, making me jump. I whirled around, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The house stood still, silent in the night. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel it. Its presence still lingered in the air, like the scent of decay, like a shadow that never left. I didn't know where I was running. I didn't know if I would ever be free. But one thing was certain, the house wasn't done with me. It wasn't done with anyone who dared to enter its cursed walls. And it was waiting for the next soul foolish enough to wander in. The darkness followed me as I ran, wrapping around me like a cloak, cold and suffocating. I could still hear the footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate, following me through the night. No matter how fast I ran, it was always right behind me. And in that moment I knew, the house would never let me go. I couldn't escape it. The nightmares, the dark, twisted images of the house that flooded my mind every time I closed my eyes. It had only been a few days since I'd left, but already the pull of that place was stronger than ever. The house was calling me, a voice so faint and insidious that it was impossible to ignore. Every corner of my mind seemed to whisper its name. Every moment felt like it was leading me back to it. I tried to move on. I tried to stay away. I threw myself into work, spent time with friends, anything to distract myself from the relentless pull. But it was no use. The unease in my chest, the constant feeling of being watched, only grew with each passing day. And then there was a letter. It came in the mail one evening, when I was just about to turn in for the night. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat but unfamiliar. There was no return address, only my name scrawled across the front, a name that seemed too personal, too intimate, considering I hadn't given anyone my new address. I tore it open with trembling hands. Asterisk, you were always meant to be here. Asterisk, the words were simple, but their meaning was clear. A chill spread down my spine as I read the note again and again. It felt like a warning, a summons, like the house knew I was avoiding it and was demanding that I return. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I had to go back. There was no escaping it. The next evening, I found myself standing at the doorstep of that cursed house once more. The air was thick with the same oppressive heaviness I'd felt the first time I'd arrived. The same sense of foreboding that clung to the walls like a thick fog. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but the door creaked open before I could even reach for the handle. It was as though it had been waiting for me, ready to welcome me back into its cold, twisted embrace. The inside of the house looked no different. The floorboards still creaked underfoot, The musty smell of rot still lingered in the air, and the rooms were as cold as ever. But there was something else now, something darker. The house felt alive, like it was watching me, aware of my every move, as if it was waiting for me to make a mistake. I couldn't move. I stood frozen in the entryway, my breath coming out in shallow, uneven gasps. The walls seemed to stretch and sway around me, and I could feel the floor beneath my feet groaning, as though it was about to give way. A sound echoed in the distance, faint at first, but unmistakable footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. I turned in the direction of the noise, my heart in my throat. The dark hallway stretched out before me, a black void that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. There was no one there, but I could feel it, the presence in the house, watching, waiting. A whisper, barely audible, brushed past my ear. Asterisk, you're not alone. Asterisk. I spun around, but there was nothing. The house was empty, except for me. Or so I thought. I began walking, though every step felt like a betrayal of my own instincts. I knew I shouldn't be here. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't. I had to know what had happened. I had to understand. I found myself drawn to the attic once more. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, the familiar chill seeping into my skin, making my teeth chatter. The door to the attic was ajar, and as I pushed it open, I was met with the same scene I'd seen before. The shadows, the dust-covered furniture, the abandoned boxes. But something was different. Something was moving. I strained my eyes in the dim light, scanning the room. At first, I saw nothing, but then the shape moved again, shifting in the corner of the room. My blood ran cold. There, crouching in the shadows, was the figure. It was no longer just a shape in the dark. It was fully formed now, its eyes gleaming in the faint light. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent at strange angles, its body contorted and unnatural. Its face was still a blur, but I could feel its gaze on me, like cold steel drilling into my skin. It opened its mouth. Asterisk, you came back. Asterisk. The voice was guttural, rasping, and filled with a kind of twisted satisfaction. It knew what I was thinking, knew what I was afraid of. I stepped back, my heart racing as the figure began to move toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Each step felt like a drumbeat, growing louder with each passing moment. I turned and fled, the sound of its footsteps pounding after me, growing louder, faster. My legs burned as I ran down the stairs, the house seemingly shifting and warping around me. The walls seemed to stretch, the rooms closing in as I passed through them, the house fighting me, trying to keep me inside. I reached the door, my hand shaking as I tried to open it, but the knob wouldn't turn. I pulled, twisted, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, the footsteps grew closer. Panic surged through me, and with all my strength, I slammed my shoulder into the door. It creaked, but still, it didn't open. I screamed, the sound raw and primal, as I pounded on the wood with my fists. And then, finally, the door burst open. I stumbled out into the night, gasping for air, my legs barely able to support me. The house loomed behind me, silent now, as though nothing had ever happened. But I knew the truth. The house hadn't let me go. It was still there, waiting. It was always waiting. And as I turned to leave, I heard it again, the soft, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps. I didn't stay long outside. The cold night air clung to my skin, but the house felt warmer in comparison, as though it had a strange magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. My breath came out in shaky puffs as I backed away, unwilling to tear my eyes from the dark silhouette of the house in front of me. It was like a looming beast, watching me with unblinking eyes, its very presence pressing down on my chest. The sound of footsteps still echoed in my ears, soft, deliberate, like the sound of someone walking behind me, just out of view. I spun around, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. I was alone, but I knew better than to trust my own senses. The house had a way of distorting reality, of making you question what was real and what wasn't. That's why I couldn't stop myself from going back inside. Something, or someone, was waiting for me there, and I had to know who or what it was. I walked up to the door again, my pulse quickening, and this time it opened easily, as though it had been waiting for me to return. The silence inside was suffocating, thick with the scent of mildew and dust, but the air felt different now. Heavy charged, as if the very house was alive with anticipation. I stepped inside, the creaking floorboards beneath me sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. Every room seemed the same, but something about the house felt wrong. The shadows seemed to move just at the edges of my vision, flickering and shifting like they were alive, but when I turned my head, they were always gone. The familiar creaks and groans of the house seemed louder than before, more pronounced. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, like the house was holding its breath. And then, just as I had feared, I heard it again. The footsteps. This time, they were closer, much closer. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, my body stiff with fear. The sound was unmistakable, slow, deliberate, heavy, as though something or someone was walking toward me one step at a time. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there. Only the hallway, stretching out in front of me, dark and empty. But I could feel it, something just out of sight. My breath quickened. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The house was never going to let me leave. Not for good. It had claimed me the moment I stepped foot inside, and now it was playing with me, toying with me. The footsteps grew louder, faster, as though whoever or whatever it was running toward me now. My heart skipped a beat as panic surged within me. I turned on my heels and bolted toward the nearest exit. The door to the kitchen was in sight, but it seemed so far away, the hallway stretching out like an endless tunnel. My legs burned. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I pushed forward, desperate to escape the relentless sound of footsteps that seemed to be gaining on me. Just as I reached the door, the lights flickered. A cold gust of air slammed into me from behind, and I spun around, expecting to see the figure from the attic again. But there was nothing but darkness. The room ahead of me had swallowed the light, leaving only a black void in its place. I should have left. I should have kept running, but instead, I found myself walking toward the darkness, my body moving as if it had a mind of its own. The footsteps followed me, echoing through the house like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something I couldn't understand. The kitchen was just as I remembered it. The old wooden table, the cracked tiles on the floor. But there was something else now, something I hadn't noticed before. A book. It sat on the counter, an old leather-bound journal, worn with age. There was no reason for it to be there. I hadn't seen it the last time I was here, but now it seemed to call out to me, urging me to open it, to see what was inside. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I opened the first page. The handwriting was faint, scrawled in ink that had faded over the years, but the words were clear. Asterisk, the house is not what it seems. It is a door, a gateway to something else. The rituals were meant to open it, to invite them in, but they never left. They never will. Asterisk, a chill ran down my spine as I read those words. The ritual, the curse, the very thing I had feared all along. The journal was filled with more entries, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. I could feel the darkness closing in on me, suffocating the air. The footsteps had stopped, but I could still hear the faint sound of breathing, the soft rasp of someone or something breathing just behind me. I slammed the journal shut and turned around. There, standing in the doorway, was a figure. Its shape was shrouded in darkness, but I could feel its presence. It was tall, impossibly tall, its silhouette stretching unnaturally as it stepped into the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as it slowly approached, its footsteps loud in the stillness, each one echoing like a death knell in my ears. The air grew colder, and I could feel its breath on my neck. I could hear it whispering to me, but the words were unintelligible, a low, guttural murmur that rattled my bones. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, the floor warping like it was made of something other than wood. It reached out toward me, its hand long and twisted, the fingers curling like claws. I stumbled backward, my legs finally giving out beneath me. But before I could fall, it was there, its cold hand wrapping around my wrist, pulling me closer. I gasped, but no sound came out. It was as though the air had been sucked from my lungs. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The room fell silent, still, dead quiet. I was alone again, or so I thought. The footsteps returned, louder now, just outside the door. They were waiting for me. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the empty doorway, my body frozen in place. The silence was deafening. I could feel my heart racing, each beat louder in my ears than the last. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and my hands trembled uncontrollably as I clutched the journal to my chest. I couldn't let it go, not yet. The footsteps outside had stopped, but the dread I felt was undeniable. The house felt alive, watching, waiting for something. For me. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. The walls seemed to be closing in, and every creak, every rustle of the floorboards made my skin crawl. I needed to leave. I had to leave. But even as I thought it, I felt the weight of something unseen, holding me in place. It wasn't just a fear. It was something else. An unspoken promise the house had made to me the moment I stepped inside. I pushed myself up, trying to ignore the dizziness that made my vision blur at the edges. I stumbled toward the door, every nerve screaming at me to run, but my feet felt heavy, like they were rooted to the floor. I reached for the doorknob, but before I could touch it, a low, hollow voice echoed from the hallway. "Leave now." The words weren't spoken aloud. They were more of a thought, a whisper in my mind, but they were unmistakable, clear, urgent. My stomach churned. I knew what it meant. Whatever it was that haunted this place, it wasn't done with me yet. I wasn't going to leave. Not yet. A cold draft swept past me, and the smell of damp earth filled the air, overpowering the musty scent of the house. The journal slipped from my hands, thudding to the floor as my attention was drawn back toward the hallway. My gaze fell upon the open door that led to the stairs, the ones that went down into the basement, the one place I hadn't dared venture. I hadn't wanted to, not after what I'd seen in the attic, not after the terrifying presence I felt creeping up behind me. But now, as the house seemed to whisper its command, I knew I had no choice. Something down there had the answers I needed, answers that would help me understand what was happening. The footsteps had stopped, but the air was thick with tension, almost as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for me to act. I took a step, then another, and soon I found myself standing at the top of the stairs. A deep, black void stretched out in front of me. It felt endless, like it could swallow me whole. And then I heard it, a faint scraping noise coming from the bottom of the stairs. It was soft at first, like something dragging across the floor, but then it grew louder, faster. I froze. There was no doubt in my mind now that I wasn't alone. Whatever it was coming for me. I backed away, my legs shaking beneath me, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears. But my feet wouldn't listen to me. The house had me in its grip, and I could feel its pull. Slowly, reluctantly, I took another step down the stairs. The scraping continued, and then I heard something else. A soft, guttural chuckle. My heart leaped into my throat. I spun around, looking for the source, but there was no one there. No one in the hallway. No one behind me. Just a dark, endless space at the bottom of the stairs. But I knew it was waiting. I forced myself to continue down, each step feeling heavier than the last. The further I descended, the colder it became. The air was thick with moisture, like the walls themselves were weeping. A low hum filled the space, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, pulsing with a dark energy that I couldn't explain. At the bottom of the stairs, I was greeted by complete darkness. I couldn't see anything, not even my own hand in front of my face. The hum was louder now, and the air seemed to vibrate with it. I reached out, trying to find a light switch, but my fingers met nothing but the cold stone of the walls. And then I felt it, a hand, cold and clammy, brushing against my wrist. I jerked away, my heart slamming into my ribs. The light switch flicked on in my mind, and I grabbed for it, desperate for the faint glow of the basement light. Nothing happened. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I turned to flee, but there was no escape. The stairs were gone. The hallway was gone. The house had shifted, the walls contorting like something from a nightmare. The space around me was expanding, stretching, as though the house had grown around me, trapping me. I was no longer standing at the bottom of the stairs. I was somewhere else, somewhere deeper, a room. I didn't know how, but the floor beneath my feet had changed. The stone, once smooth, now felt rough, jagged, like I was standing on broken bones. I could feel the weight of something pressing against me, like the room itself was alive, pressing in from all sides. The hum grew louder, more insistent, until it was almost deafening. And then, suddenly it stopped. A voice, cold and unfeeling, filled the silence. Leave before it's too late. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air was thick with dread, and the walls closed in on me, suffocating. I could hear the scratching again, closer now, closer than ever. It was coming from within the walls. I wanted to run, to escape, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. The shadows in the corners of the room began to stretch, twisting, forming shapes that danced in the dim light. And then, in the center of the room, I saw it. A figure, its face obscured, its body twisted and contorted in ways that defied logic. It stood there, staring at me, its eyes dark and hollow. It was the same figure I had seen in the attic. It reached toward me with a single gnarled hand, its fingers stretching impossibly long, and for the first time, I understood. This was no ordinary haunting. This was a prison, and I was its next victim. The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the ground beneath me gave way. I fell, plummeting into darkness, and then, nothing. I woke up with a sharp, sudden gasp, my chest heaving as I sat up. My surroundings were different. The room was familiar but distorted, like I had returned to it after a long, restless absence. The walls, the dim lighting, the thick smell of mildew in the air, it all felt so real. Too real. I blinked rapidly, trying to shake off the lingering fog in my head. For a moment, I couldn't tell what was happening where I was. Was it real? Was I still in the basement? Had I really fallen, or had it all been a dream? I glanced around, the darkness almost tangible, pressing against me. No! I wasn't in the basement anymore. The stairs, the door, the sounds, it was all gone. I was back in my room, the one I had been in when I first moved in. But everything was wrong. The air felt heavier, like something was watching me. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I felt nauseous, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. I wasn't sure if I could trust my own mind anymore. The visions, the voices, everything had been so vivid, so real. But now I was here again, trapped in this place. Then it hit me, the house. I took a deep, shaky breath. It was still here, still calling me. But there was something else, something sinister. I could feel it pressing down on me from all sides. I hurried to the window and looked outside. The same view. Trees swaying in the wind, the streetlights casting a weak orange glow. Nothing had changed. The world outside seemed so normal, so untouched. But inside this house, it was different. A soft sound interrupted my thoughts. A faint tapping, almost like a knock. I froze, my heart thumping painfully in my chest. The sound came from behind me, from the door, but no one could be out there. No one had been here. I slowly turned, my breath catching in my throat. The door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it that way. It had been closed when I came in. I knew I hadn't opened it, but something or someone had. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, whispering sound. It was faint at first, almost like a distant hum, but as it grew louder, it became clearer. Words, whispered words. Leave. Leave before it's too late. I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of this place, but the air felt thick, as if the house itself had become an extension of my own body, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. My eyes moved to the floor, and there it was, something that had been there before but that I hadn't noticed. A stain, a dark, sticky stain that spread across the wood like a pool of ink, slowly creeping toward the door. I wanted to step away from it, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. The whispering grew louder, more frantic. You're too late. It's already begun. The air turned colder. I could see my breath in front of me. The darkness around me seemed to deepen, as though something was pulling at it, stretching it out like a dark fabric. I felt a sharp pang of dread in my gut, my stomach twisting into knots. The shadows in the corners of the room started to move, to shift. They were no longer just shadows. They were something else, alive, conscious. The shapes they formed grew more distinct, more defined, until I saw them clearly. Figures, shadowy figures, standing just beyond my reach, staring at me with hollow, unblinking eyes. I turned toward the door again, knowing what I had to do. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let whatever was in this house claim me. But as I moved, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I gasped, my pulse racing. The room seemed to pulse with energy, as though the walls were closing in on me. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around for an escape, but there was none. I was trapped. The floor creaked beneath me as something heavy shifted. I looked down and a low, guttural growl filled the air. The floorboards were buckling, warping, like they were being twisted from beneath. My legs went weak, and I collapsed to the ground, my hands pressing against the cold, splintering wood. I heard a voice that wasn't mine. It's here. The voice was raspy, filled with pain. It sounded like it had come from the walls themselves, from the very bones of the house. The floor creaked again, louder this time, as though something was moving beneath it, something that shouldn't have been there. I scrambled to my feet, but the air was thick, like a force was pressing down on me, making it impossible to breathe. The darkness grew deeper, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I couldn't tell if the room was shrinking or if I was being pulled deeper into it, but either way, I knew that I was running out of time. The figures in the corner of the room grew bolder. They were stepping out of the shadows now, their faces twisted in grotesque expressions. Some were smiling, wide, knowing smiles. Others were not smiling at all. Their eyes were dark, empty voids. One of them reached out toward me, its hand gnarled and skeletal, its fingers stretched impossibly long, curling in the air like vines searching for something to latch onto. The temperature dropped further. My breath was visible, trembling in the freezing air. "Leave now!" The voice whispered again, but it was too late. I felt the cold hand brush against my shoulder, and I screamed. The world around me tilted, everything spinning, as I felt myself being dragged backward, pulled into the depths of the house. The shadows seemed to wrap themselves around me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I didn't know how I got here or what was happening to me, but as the walls closed in and the whispers grew louder, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to leave, and neither was the house. Not ever. The last thing I heard before everything went black was the soft scraping sound, like nails against wood, slow, deliberate, and relentless. And then silence. I woke up with a start, gasping for air as if I had just been pulled from the depths of some horrible nightmare. The room was still dark, but the oppressive silence hung heavily in the air. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I had gotten here. My heart pounded in my chest, echoing in my ears as I tried to gather my bearings. The bed, the sheets, the smell of dampness in the air. It all felt too familiar. This house, this cursed house. I reached out, my hand trembling, feeling the cool wood of the nightstand beside me. The lamp beside it flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. There was no sign of the shadows that had reached for me, no sign of the figures that had haunted me. But I knew, deep in my bones, that they were still there, watching, waiting. The cold air had settled in once again, though it wasn't as chilling as it had been the night before. It felt different now, more like the house was breathing, alive in a way that no building should be. I could feel it in the creaking of the floorboards beneath me, in the subtle vibrations that made the air feel heavy and thick. I tried to move, but my body felt sluggish, weighed down by some unseen force. As I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, the floor groaned beneath me and I froze. Something was wrong. The hallway outside my door was pitch black, the air stale and cold. I could hear the faint hum of the house, a low, throbbing sound, almost like it was alive. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I knew I shouldn't go out there, but I had no choice. I walked slowly toward the door, every step echoing loudly in the silence. I reached for the knob, my hand shaking, but when I touched it, a shock ran through my body. I jerked my hand back, heart racing. The door opened by itself. My breath caught in my throat as the door creaked on its hinges, revealing the hallway outside. It was pitch black, as though the house itself had swallowed all the light. But I could feel something in the air, something watching. I stepped forward cautiously, my footsteps almost drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat. The walls felt too close, too oppressive. Every step was a struggle, like the house was trying to hold me in place, to keep me from escaping. I walked down the hallway, my eyes darting to every corner. The silence was suffocating. My feet dragged across the floor, making the creaks and groans of the house sound like screams in the distance. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. No, this was a silence filled with tension, as though everything was waiting for something to happen. I passed the rooms, one after another, but there was nothing. No strange shadows, no eerie whispers. For a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe the house wasn't haunted. Maybe it was just an old place, creaky and full of strange noises. But then I reached the stairs. At the top of the stairs, I could see a faint glow coming from below, flickering, as if a candle had been left burning in the dark. The basement. I didn't want to go down there. I didn't want to face whatever had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for me. But I had no choice. I had to know. The air grew colder as I descended, the temperature dropping with each step. The basement door was slightly ajar, and I could see the faint glow of the candle flickering in the darkness. As I approached, I heard a voice, a whisper, faint but unmistakable. Leave. I didn't know where it came from, whether it was a voice from the past or from the house itself. But I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. I pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges almost deafening in the stillness. The basement was dark, but the candle's glow illuminated the room just enough for me to see the shapes lurking in the shadows. Figures. They were standing there, motionless, staring at me with eyes that were far too dark, far too empty. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I was frozen in place, trapped by the sight of those eyes. The candle flickered once more, and then, just like that, the light went out. The room plunged into total darkness. I tried to turn and run, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey me. Something held me in place, binding me to the spot. I could feel a presence closing in on me, something cold and malevolent, something ancient. Then the whispers came again, but this time they weren't words. They were laughter, low, guttural laughter that seemed to fill the entire basement. I gasped for air, but it felt like the very oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I could feel the cold fingers of fear crawling up my spine as I slowly turned around, trying to find a way out, but there was none. I was trapped in the house. Then I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from behind me. They echoed in the basement, one step after another, getting closer with each passing second. I didn't dare turn around. I knew if I did, I would see something I couldn't escape, something I couldn't outrun. The footsteps stopped. I turned, my heart racing, and that's when I saw it. The figure, a tall, shadowy form standing just beyond the candlelight, its face hidden in the darkness. But I could feel its gaze on me, cold, suffocating. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered, its voice a low rasp that sent chills through my body. And then it lunged. I ran as fast as I could, the cold air rushing past me, the walls closing in on me. The house groaned and creaked with each step, as if it was alive, feeding off my fear. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape. When I finally burst through the front door, I didn't look back. I drove away in a haze, my hands trembling on the wheel, my mind racing. The house loomed in my rear-view mirror, its windows dark and empty. But I knew better than to think I was free. Whatever had been in that house, whatever was tied to it, wasn't done with me. The house hadn't let go, and it never would. I could still hear its whispers in my ear, even now.